Okay, it's recording. It's very nice to meet you.
She said, it's very nice to meet you.
It's my pleasure. And excuse me for asking, but I've forgotten your first name.
Shelby.
Shelby. Okay, Shelby.
First, I want to say thank you for your service in World War II.
She
I'm
said,
a little hard of hearing, so you have to speak a little slower and a little louder, okay?
so she
Okay,
said, thank you for your service, she said.
All right. And you're more than welcome.
So, is it okay if you could tell me about your life before you entered the war?
Before I went to the war,
Mm-hmm.
well, I was nothing but a little high school student when the war started. And that was in 1942. The war, of course, started in 1941, but I was in high school and I graduated from high school at 17 years of age in 1942 and immediately went down and signed up for flight training down in Tuskegee. And I was accepted. I got my letter of acceptance in December of 42, and in January, a couple of weeks later, I was on my way down to Biloxi, Mississippi for basic training. And there for approximately a couple of months, and then up to Tuskegee, where I became an aviation student. And after 4.5 months or so as an aviation student, I went north 8 miles to Tuskegee Army Airfield, where I become an aviation cadet.
Wow.
And I was in class 44E. And my training lasted, I don't know, close to 10, 11 months. And I graduated from flight school on May the 23rd, 1944. Then advanced fighter training, and then went overseas in September of 1944. And of course, the rest is history. I flew 30 missions, and on my 30th mission, I went down. I was strafing a large locomotive,
Mm-hmm.
and just as I passed over is when it all blew up, and I was caught in that big explosion, and some of the debris knocked out my engine, and I lost my engine, but it ran long enough for me to get up to some altitude so I could bail out of my aircraft. So I had to parachute out, and then I was picked up by a couple of German soldiers, and I became a POW. So in a nutshell, that's what happened to me.
Wow. Were any of your family members were in the military?
Try that again.
Sorry. Were any of your family members in the military?
Any of your family members in the
My
military?
older brother went in the military, 5 years my senior. He went in the military in June of 1942. He was drafted. And matter of fact, he was in Italy the same way I was in Italy, only he was all the way up in northern Italy, up around Po Valley. I was down in southern Italy, directly across from Naples at a place called Ramitelli, right on the Adriatic Sea. And that's where the 15th Air Force was stationed, and they had 7 fighter groups, and we were one of the 7 fighter groups. And they had, I don't know how many bomb groups that they had, but they had approximately 400 to 500 bombers that we were flying with, protecting, taking them up into Europe and providing protection for them to get them back home.
Wow. What were your parents like?
Typical parents. They weren't that strict on me. They gave me a lot of freedom as I was growing up, but there were some rules that I had to follow. My dad was a very, very quiet man, had very, very few words to say. So most of the words that are instructions that he gave out to my big brother. But he made sure that I was there listening to it. So I knew what to do too. But it was quite ordinary, nothing outstanding, nothing special about it. Typical parents, you know. And as long as I followed the rules, everything was okay. But they never gave me a whipping at all, never. But if I did something wrong, they would set me down and we would have a conversation.
Mm.
And they make sure that I understood what the rules were. And I was smart enough never to let it happen again. So that was life as I was growing up.
Did you face segregation while growing up?
Uh,
So Shelby, you're probably going to have to speak slowly for him. So
Sorry. So I'm trying to, did you face segregation while growing up?
oh, absolutely. I grew up almost 100 years ago. I'm 98 years old now. So even up in northern Minnesota, we were in a segregated society, not only by law, but by tradition. And it was just a way of life. I didn't make any big deal out of it. And I never got myself in trouble or nothing like that. But absolutely, there were segregation places I could go, places I could not go because of my color. And I just followed the rules. And it didn't make any difference to me because I couldn't afford to go to those places anyway. I didn't have any money. So absolutely, I faced segregation like everyone else did. But I will say this, Minnesota was very, very liberal. And it was perhaps much more liberal than any other states that you would find down in the South. And so the rules and whatnot, I had fewer rules and whatnot. And I did a lot of things that I could not do in the South. For example, I went to an integrated high school and race didn't make any difference. We had a little bit of everything there. That would never happen down south. Excuse
Are you
me.
okay?
But it would happen up in north in Minnesota. So segregated was far less enforced up in northern Minnesota than it would be, say, like down in Alabama or Mississippi.
Where did you go to school? Sorry, where did you go to school?
What did I what?
Where did you go to school?
School?
Yes, which school did you go to?
Okay, I was in Minneapolis and I went in what was called then North High School. I lived on the north side of Minneapolis, and it was called North High School, and that's the high school that I went to. Matter of fact, we had a very, very large high school. In my class, we had 523 students in my graduating class. So that's a pretty large class. And the whole population of the school was running close to 3,000 students. So it's a big high school.
Wow. Were you married before you left for the war?
One more time, please.
Were you married before you left for the war?
Married? No, I was a little young, I was not but just a little teenager. Like I said, I graduated at 17. And I immediately went down and signed up. And after I signed up 6 months later, I received my acceptance letter that I had been accepted for flight training. And I had just turned 18 that August in 1942. So I was not but a little young 18-year-old kid when I was off and running to become a fighter pilot.
Why did you join the military?
Well, like I said, in the military, I was a fighter pilot. I was in the 99th Fighter Squadron, the 332nd Fighter Group. And prior to that time, they did not accept Black folks into military flight training. We were the first group of Black kids to ever go into flight training. But it all started in World War II. And there were some 355 of us that went overseas to fight the war. We were trained down at Tuskegee Institute, which was 35 miles east of Montgomery, Alabama. And that's why they call us Tuskegee Airmen, because we were trained at Tuskegee Institute, the school. They trained a total of 950 pilots were trained down there over the 6 years that it existed. 355 of us went overseas as fighter pilots. The bomber pilots, the twin engine bomber pilots who were flying B-25s at that time, did not get the opportunity to go overseas. When the war ended for us in the European theater, Colonel Bill Davis came back home to take the bomber boys over to the Pacific Theater. But the war ended before they got over there and before they left for it. So the bomber boys did not have the opportunity to go to war. But had there been time, they would have gone over to the Pacific area for their flying. Okay?
What was the training like?
Well, flight training was very, very rigorous, the whole program. And we went through the exact same program. They only had one program, and it was the same for everyone, white or Black, who went through the Army Air Corps at that time. And it was very, very rigorous. They had a ground school that went along with a flying portion. We had classes that we went to, a variety of them. For example, I was in a weather class. obviously, as a pilot, you have to know something about weather. And one of the classes that we took involved weather. So we took a variety of classes that was all important to us, and learning how to fly and learning what life would be like as a military pilot flying military aircraft.
Which military branch were you placed in?
All right, one more time. I'm sorry, Keith.
Which military branch were you placed in?
I'm having trouble understanding you, and forgive me.
Okay,
My
Shelby, what
bad.
was it?
I'm asking which military branch was he placed in?
Which military branch were you placed in? I bet you already know the answer to that one though, Shelby, right?
Mhm.
Well, then it was the Army Air Corps, because we were part of the Army. We were not a separate unit. So we were the Army Air Corps, which was all a part of the United States Army. Okay.
Mhm. Which unit were you assigned to?
The unit I was in was the first unit that came into existence for us was the 99th Fighter Squadron. And they only had a single squadron at that time. They went overseas as a squadron, but they were training us, and we had graduating classes every 5 weeks. So they had to create then a fighter group. A fighter group has 3 fighter squadrons in it. So they created the 332nd Fighter Group for all of these pilots they were training. So they had the 100th Squadron, the 301st Squadron, and the 302nd Squadron, all in the 332nd Fighter Group. So when we completed our flight training and wound up in the 332nd Fighter Group, we were assigned to one of those programs. At that time, the 99th joined the 332nd Fighter Group. So we had 4 squadrons in the fighter group. And I was in the 99th Fighter Squadron, 332nd Fighter Group. Okay.
What was your rank?
My rank, I graduated as a little second lieutenant. And that was my rank. And I went overseas as a second lieutenant. After being overseas for a short while, I made first lieutenant. And when I went down, I was a first lieutenant and came home as a first lieutenant after the war.
Wow. When and where were you deployed?
Okay, let me give you a little history. When the 99th Squadron first went overseas, they went overseas as a squadron. They went to North Africa. At that time, the military was fighting in North Africa. They were fighting a very famous German general. He was known as the Desert Fox, and they were fighting him in North Africa. Then, after the fighting ended in North Africa, the Germans retreated up into Italy, Sicily, then up into Italy. By the time that they got to Italy, we now had the 332nd Fighter Group consisting of 3 squadrons that was now into the war. And they went over to Italy on January the 1st, 1944. When I finally joined them, the 99th had now joined the 332nd, and they were transferred from Naples, Italy, where they were doing nothing more but patrol duty, over to the 15th Air Force, where they were flying actual missions. And the missions that they were assigned to do was to protect the bombers of the 15th Air Force as they made bombing runs from Italy, flying from north to south, all the way up throughout Europe, bombing a variety of targets throughout Europe. For example, we went to a number of the cities in Germany, and as I reflect through them, I was trying to remember some of our targets, but I was having a little trouble remembering some of the targets. But as we keep talking, as if I remember some of the targets that we were hitting in Germany, I will tell you what they were. But
Okay.
right now, I'm just having trouble remembering them.
That's okay. Is there a fight or a battle you remember?
Here I go again, me and my
Sorry.
bad ears.
Is there a fight or a battle that you remember?
She said, is there a flight or battle that you remember?
Okay, well, let me see. Yeah, I remember two of them very, very distinctly. On my 12th mission, I got into a dogfight with the German fighters known as the ME-262, which was jet fighters, twin engine jet fighters. And I got into a dogfight with one of those, and they attacked our bombers. We were at 30,000 feet escorting B-17 when they came in and they attacked our bombers, and we wound up in the dogfight with them. And I can remember that quite well. Myself and my wingman, we dove down on one of the ME-262. He saw us coming, and he went straight down from 30,000 feet all the way down to the ground. And we were flying at treetop level, and we were chasing him. And you might wonder how in the world could we in a P-51 an engine keep up with the twin engine jet? Well, we were able to keep up with him, because when he went straight down, he was going as fast as he could go. When we were going straight down with him, we picked up additional speed because gravity helped us, but it didn't help him. He was already at his maximum speed. So we could then, because of gravity, we could travel as fast as he could travel. So we could keep up with him. And we followed him all the way down to the ground. And that was when he leveled off. And of course, once he leveled off, then gravity couldn't help us anymore, and he pulled away from us. So we never actually got caught up with him. But that was quite a memorable fighter day. The other mission I remember quite well is the mission I was shot down on. I was on a strafing mission. You know what strafing means?
What does it mean?
Okay, strafing is when fighter aircraft are going after ground targets, locomotives, trucks, anything that's sitting on the ground. and we are coming in, picking up those targets on the ground. So strafing involves going after ground targets. Rather, they're going after another airborne fighter, enemy fighter. So this is strictly ground targets, and that's what you're going after. And we would periodically go on strafing missions where we were going out looking for ground targets. Well, most of our targets on the ground were locomotives, carrying a string of boxcars and whatnot, which is probably loaded with ammunition and other Army supplies. Those were our favorite targets. And those were the targets that we normally went after when we were strafing.
Wow. Were you injured?
Were you injured?
No, as a matter of fact, my next incident that happened on my 12th mission, on my 30th mission was when I went down. And I went down on a strafing mission. We had picked up a variety of targets, but one of the targets that we picked up, I was leading the lead flight, flying the wing of our wing commander. And we had a very successful day, and we were on our way home, and we spotted this huge locomotive carrying a whole string of boxcars. So we said, up, we missed one. So he says, come on, Brown. He told the rest of the guys, circle. Brown and I are going to go down to pick up that last locomotive and the string of boxcars. So I was flying on his wing. He went in and he ran out of ammunition. So he had to pull up. I had some ammunition left, so I continued and took up where he left off. And I went in on the locomotive and I lit the locomotive up. I knew I was on target because I could see my bullets hitting him. And every time a bullet would hit, it would flash. And I had 6 guns in my wing. So you can imagine how many bullets I was firing at one time out of 6 guns. And I could see my bullets hitting the locomotive, and it lit the locomotive up because so many bullets were hitting it. And just as I passed over the locomotive, that whole locomotive exploded. And when it exploded, if you can imagine a great big large locomotive engine blowing up, it was quite an explosion. And I got caught in the explosion, and some of the debris from the engine, from the locomotive engine, struck my aircraft and damaged my aircraft. So when I pulled up off of the target, my airplane was flying okay, but then it started acting rough because my engine had been damaged. And it was damaged to the extent that it only ran for no more than about 2 to 3 minutes. And then my engine started running out and I had to bail out of the aircraft. And of course, I bailed out. I was about 1,500 feet above the ground when I bailed out of my aircraft. And I was immediately picked up by 2 German soldiers, and I became a prisoner of war for the remaining part of my stay in the military.
Wow. When you were a POW, what were you forced to do?
Well, we didn't do anything. They had us in barracks, surrounded by barbed wire and whatnot. The whole prison camp was surrounded with barbed wire. you had guards stationed outside around the whole prison. So there's no way that you could get away. You were there. And most prison camps had a number of barracks. A barrack will hold just about 200 men. And the first prisoner of war camp I was in Nuremberg, Germany. And it was just south of Nuremberg. It was a big camp. As a matter of fact, we had almost, if you can imagine this, we had almost 10,000 prisoners in that camp. And the reason why we had so many is that the Americans were advancing. They had invaded Europe and they were advancing from east to west. And they kept pushing the Germans back. The Russians, which was on the other side, on the eastern side of Germany, they were advancing from east to west. So here you had these two big armies on each side of Germany, and they kept advancing, they kept pushing the German army back into their home bases. So this is what was going on. So this is why we had so many prisoners, because as we would get close to a prison camp, they would take all of the prisoners and move them inland to a different prison camp. So this is what was going on. So some of the prison camps, like the one in Nuremberg, was getting more and more prisoners. This is why they had so many of them, because the Americans were getting closer and closer, and they had to take the prisoners and move them back into Germany. So there was a big camp there. And like I said, there was almost 10,000 people in that one prison camp. And they got so close finally that they had to march us out of the prison camp, and we had to walk to the next one. It took us 2 weeks, and we walked about, I don't know, a couple hundred miles or so to get to the next prison camp, where we stayed at until the end of the war.
Wow.
I don't know if this is making any sense to you, but
No, it is.
I hope you understand what I'm saying. Okay.
I do. When was your prison camp liberated?
When was your prison camp liberated?
Let me see. We were there, and Patton came through on April the 29th. And as a matter of fact, while we were in the prison camp, we could hear all the shooting and whatnot going on. So we knew that Patton and his troops were all getting closer and closer. And it'd be just a matter of days before he got there. And he finally reached our prison camp on April the 29th. And he came in, and of course, you know, all of the German guards knew that he would be arriving. So they all marched out of the prison camp to get away. They didn't want to get captured. So they departed, and he came into the prison camp, you know, tore down the gates. And it was rather funny thing was this. We had, oh my God, that was one of the largest prison camps they had in Germany. I think they had close to 30-some thousand prisoners in that camp. And we had Americans, Englishmen, Frenchmen, every country that was fighting in the war, that had people over in Germany fighting. Some portion of them was in that prison camp. And it was one of the largest prison camps that they had in Germany. But it was because of where it was located. And as the Russians and the Americans kept pushing the Germans inland, kept making more advances, they kept pushing the POWs inland to this one great big prison camp. So by the time the war ended, it was huge. Like I said, 30-some thousand prisoners was all in that single prison camp. And Patton liberated us on April the 29th. Now, after he liberated us, obviously with all those mob of prisoners, you couldn't have them roaming out there in the countryside. So they rounded all of us up and they kept us in the prison camp. And they kept us there until they could bring in aircraft to take us out of the prison camp. So it took something like 4, 5, 6 weeks before I even got out of the prison camp. And I was transported back to a place called Camp Lucky Strike, which was in France. And then I stayed at Camp Lucky Strike, is where they took all of us, where they showered us, gave us new uniforms, put us on ships, and sent us back home. So that whole process took just about 6 weeks. So even though I was liberated on the 29th of April, I didn't get home until the latter part of June. It took almost 2 months, for me to finally get home after I was liberated and the war was ended in Germany.
The prison camp you talked about, what was it called?
I was trying to think of the name of it, and I hope I do shortly, but the prison camp had a name for it. And I'm looking at my wife, hoping that maybe she can remember the name of it. But
Which one are you
but
talking about? I was reading something else. What are you
but
talking?
she is going to look up the
Well-
name of it right now.
Why
Okay.
not listening? What camp are you even talking about?
The prison camp.
Which one?
Well, that's it. I can't think of the
No.
name of it.
Okay, hold on. Let's see. Because
Matter
you
of
were
fact-
at one and then you were moved to another one.
Yeah.
Okay. Stalag 13D, is that the one you're talking about?
Now that was the first one.
Right,
The
Stalag,
second one was Stalag 7, I think.
Stalag, yeah, Stalag Luft 7A in Moosburg. Is that what you're talking?
Okay. I was in Moosburg, Germany. Moosburg, Germany was located about 30 miles or so north of Munich, Germany. So I was in Stalag 7A.
Yeah, Luft.
My first prison camp was Stalag 13A in Nuremberg.
It was actually,
I was liberated in 7A, which was just like I said, 35 miles north of Munich, Germany.
so just one thing, Shelby, I don't know if that it matters, but it's always Roman numerals for the names of prison camps. So it was like Stalag, XII, all in capitals. So Stalag 13D, and then he was moved to Stalag Luft, and then it's capital V, capital I, in Moosburg.
Wow.
Okay.
Mhm. Did you have any friends that were lost in the war?
What's that?
Did you have friends that were
Oh
lost in the
my
war?
goodness, yes. Out of our class, I think of the number of guys that we lost out of my class alone. We lost there were a total of, I think this is the right number. There was either 62 or 66 men one or the other, 62 or 66, that was killed out of our total group. In addition to those guys that we lost during the war, that died during the war, there were still some 32 or 33 of us who became prisoners of war. So that was close to 100 of us. 66 died, 32, 33 became prisoners of war. And
Are you
those
okay?
66 that died, several of them were my classmates. As a matter of fact, I think within my class, I think we lost 6 or 7 guys that was killed out of my class who was killed during the war.
I'm sorry to hear that. What is one thing from World War II that you will never forget?
Well, I suppose I remember the entire experience, but I guess I will never forget the time I spent as a POW. That was the worst time of my life. And that is the one thing that I will never forget, you know, as a POW. But at the same time, I will never forget a number of, you know, some of the missions that I flew to. I will just never forget them. But between a few special missions, and particularly like that strafing mission that I was on, that I had to bail out of my aircraft, I will never forget that. And I will remember, you know, jumping out of my aircraft forever. So those kinds of memories, things that happened to me during the war, but you know, there are bad memories, but good things happen out of them. Nothing bad happened to me, so that's the good part.
When were you discharged?
When? Well, I stayed in the military. I come home from the military after World War II ended, and then I stayed in the military for a total of 23 years before I retired. And I retired as a lieutenant colonel, and that was in 1965 when I finally retired from the military. So I had a number of assignments. As a matter of fact, part of my assignments, I went over to the Far East, and I was stationed in Japan for 3 years. And that was back in the 50s, you know. Then I came home from there, and I was at the Ellington Air Force Base for a few years, and, you know, and a few other bases. But that was my life after World War II. During the Korean War, I was in Korea, but I was not as a fighter pilot. I was in Korea, and I was installing electronic system, and I was an electronics officer, and I was installing radar systems in Korea. And I can remember one time as we were installing equipment and we were pretty close to where the fighting was going on. And the MPs came through on a truck and was screaming at us, get out, get in your Jeep and get out. The enemy has broken through, and the enemy had broken through our line. So we had to jump on our Jeeps as fast as we could to get out of there. And we traveled all the way south down to the southern part of Korea to get away from them because they had broken through. So that was the closest that I came to combat. but I did not fly combat in Korea.
But you experienced combat in Korea?
Did you experience combat in Korea?
No, I did not. I was always far enough behind the line. Even though we were putting up radar systems, we were doing that behind the line. The lines were several miles up in front of us. So I was never up into where the actual fighting was going on.
Wow. After the war, did you have any long or short-term injuries?
Did you have any injuries, is I think what she just asked?
No, no injuries at all. I was very fortunate. Like I said, even though I participated, in both wars, I lost 2 aircraft in World War II. I crash landed one, but I was not injured at all. Then I bailed out of the next aircraft. I was not injured, but I became a POW in World War II. And then in Korea, I was always working behind the front line. I was never up on the front lines of Korea, so I wasn't in actual combat in Korea.
Was the transition from being out of the military difficult?
Sorry, just a second.
Did you hear that?
No, just a second, I'll turn this off. Oh, hold on.
Can you repeat it a minute? And so Marcia can hear it.
Was the transition from being out of the military difficult?
Was the transition from being in the military and then getting out of it difficult?
None whatsoever. I knew precisely what I was going to do when I retired. I was just a young man. I was only 40 years old when I retired from the military, and I already had my plan. I was going to go back to school, get my master's degree, get my doctorate degree. I was going to go into education, which is what I did. I was in the community college system. Have you heard of community colleges? The
Yes.
2 colleges, then that's the system that I was in. And I knew precisely what I was going to do. And that is precisely what I did. Went back to school, got my degree. I was at Columbus State Community College. When I went with them at first, they were called Columbus Technical Institute, but they became later on Columbus State Community College. We were perhaps the second largest community college in the state of Ohio. And that's what I did. And I stayed in that for the next 21 years. Then after I left the community college system, I then went into consulting work, and I was working for the state of Ohio, and I was a consultant for the state of Ohio. And what I was doing is the state of Ohio had several hundred private profit-making schools. They all had to be regulated with our board, the state board. We regulated them. There are certain rules they had to follow. We had to approve every program that they offered to make sure that they came up to standards. So that's what I did for the next 26 years of my life. So finally, when I was 80 some years old and my wife retired, I said, I am tired of working. I am going to retire too. So I retired and I gave it all up. And by that time, I was about 83 years old or so, something close to that. And I gave up my life and I started living the good life. No more working for me.
Were you given any medals or awards?
Okay, I didn't hear. Could you repeat it, Shelby?
Were you given any medals or awards?
Were you given any medals or awards?
Yeah, I received the Purple Heart and I have what is called the Air Medal. I have 2 clusters on it. And I got the Purple Heart. And those are the 2 medals I got. The one medal that I wanted very bad was the Distinguished Flying Cross. But I became a POW before I got it. But that was the one medal that I really wanted, but I never received. My career was cut short and being shot down and becoming a POW. Then that's when my combat career ended. But had I not been shot down, I bet I would have gotten the DSC had I completed my career in World War II.
Wow. Did you attend ceremonies honoring World War II veterans like yourself?
Have you attended ceremonies honoring World War II events? You know, well, the Congressional Gold Medal is probably the biggest one, but
Oh yeah, geez, we have had a number of
Yeah, lots.
events. Like my wife just reminded me, they had a big event for the 332nd, the Black Pilots, and that was held up in Washington, D.C. in the Capitol. And
Bush, George Bush was there.
yeah, at that time, George Bush was the president. But that is one of the biggest affairs. But there have been any number of smaller affairs that I have attended. I can't identify them by name right now, where they invited just a handful, 4 or 5 or 6 Tuskegee Airmen to come in attendance. But keep in mind, there's only 7 of us left now. So there's just a few of us even left to even go to anything, even if we were invited to. And even though there's only a few of us left, I have been invited to several events, which I have been, in attendance at, and I was there by myself. But there's nobody left.
Would you go back to where you fought?
Okay, Shelby, what was the question?
My last question was, would you go back to where you fought?
Would you go back to where you fought? I think she means probably Ramitelli.
Did I go?
Would you? Would
I've
you?
always said that one day I was going to go back to our old air base in Ramitelli, Italy, but I've never done it yet. Now, I did go overseas. I made a trip over to England, France, and whatnot, but I didn't get down into Italy. But I've often said that one day I would like to go back to Italy. I've never done it yet. And go back to Ramitelli, where our old base was at, just to look at. There's probably nothing there but an old farm by now. And it's all, the runways and everything have all vanished. But I would still like to see the place. And I don't know if I'll get back to it or not. Probably not at this late stage in my life.
Wow. Okay, that was all my questions.
That was her last question, I think she said.
It is, huh?
Mhm.
Well,
Exactly an hour.
I hope I enjoyed the chit chat with you, and I hope it was enjoyable, and I
It
hope
was.
you responded sufficiently to most of the questions that you asked me.
Mhm.
So I enjoyed it. I hope you did too.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, just want to say again, thank you for your service in the military.
She said, thank you for your service to the military.
Okay.
So Shelby, what is your long-term goal, your career goal?
So even after I received my Girl Scout Gold Award, I plan to continue on the project.
So you mean to interview veterans?
Yes, because the reason why I'm doing this project is my generation isn't aware of the sacrifices and risks people made to protect our country. And it's also a way to celebrate the memory of my grandfather who was stationed in Japan during World War II's post-war era.
Yeah, cool. Well, and I don't know if I mentioned to you, but if you have the time and energy, we do have a book about Harold's whole life if you want to get all the facts down. I think I probably did, right?
Yes, I remember you recommended it to me, and I plan to get it.
Okay, cool, cool. Well, good for you.
Well,
Yeah, thank
good
you.
luck on whatever it is that you do, and I hope you have a lot of success in it. And I think you will.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Okay.
Okay, bye.
Let me take it here.